Okay, once again, welcome to the 7th Leipzig Leadership Talk. With two distinguished people, on my left, Luisa Neubauer, on my right, Nikolaj Schultz. Please give a warm welcome to Luisa and Nikolaj. Today's talk is titled Self-Leadership in the Anthropocene. Or in other words, what does it mean to come to terms in times when our Earth system fights back, responds harshly to what we did to it? That's our topic today. The series itself started in 2017 or something, happens organized only once or 2 times a year. It's dedicated to the frontiers of our thinking, to the frontiers of leadership issues at hand. We welcome people in an open dialogue, so there will also be a chance for you to engage. And this dialogue this time is dedicated, as I said, to the Anthropocene. A new term on Earth, we will discuss maybe later about it. And for the ones who already know it, only one lecture slide. It's what we call a life leadership model. Luisa and Nikolaj, once you were here at the school, you would be kind of confronted with this model, which is something all our students are confronted with by saying it's not enough to help non-profits. It's not enough to succeed in personal career. Good leadership means to contribute. Who contributes leads. And all good leadership is measured against what we call current challenges. Of course, climate change being one of it, including biodiversity and all the dimensions involved, what these days is called the planetary boundaries. Demographics, as well as these days also geopolitics and others. That's what I see our students over there. They ask us, what does it mean? And as a business school, of course, we are not only business friendly, we also try to kind of help transform business. I guess we will talk about this, what this could mean in times of Earth for All reports telling us we need a giant leap to stay within a limit which could be called safe space. And today it's about the many, many little transformations in our own lives as a consumer, as a citizen, as a person on this planet, what this means. And in actual fact, this could mean that we talk about a lot about psychology today. And in welcoming those 2 distinguished speakers, let me first introduce both of them. Of course, on my left, it's okay, the picture? Yeah. Of course, Luisa is one, I would say, the leading German climate activist. In a minute or so, I will rename her profession. In a minute or so. She is co-founder, co-initiator of what these days has been called Fridays for Future. Most of you know that in 2021, Luisa, in Karlsruhe, Neubauer against Germany, did kind of win a court issue where our government was accused not being as ambitious as it should be. Neubauer against Germany. And since then, Luisa met Dr. Pope and our honorary doctorate, Angela Merkel, but also President Macron, Barack Obama, and many, many, many more. And to me, when we talked about this invitation, it was starting to see that the latest book, I guess the 5th one, the 5th book, Was wäre, wenn wir mutig sind, what if we were courageous? Talked about kind of a new perspective, a different perspective. I will come to this in a minute. To my right hand side, Professor Nikolaj Schultz. Cool. Our weekly magazine site called him the New Star of Sociology. not the rising star, only a star. If we have the bestseller already on the desk, land cities. In some courses, students have to do it mandatory.
Really?
It's there.
It's very good. It's Landkrank in German. Landkrank. It's always good in German. Everything sounds better, more serious.
You cannot only get seasick, you have to land sick, Landkrank. And I'm a bit jealous, he's actually a pupil of Kulatu. It's master in a way, but also many others like Shakarati or Sarashite technologies were recognized around the world. We published together with Una this book on the emergence of what is called the ecological class or the working class. Yes, we will talk about this sociological phenomenon. And in a way, now being a professor at Harvard University Architecture Department, I thought Nikolaj is the perfect match to Europe for this discussion. Let's get started. When I read this book, I thought, well, I came to know her as a climate activist. Another thing, you're a climate psychologist. You said facts are good, but emotions are as good as facts, or even better. It's not enough to present data, charts and stripes and things, and present reports about the flow, and so on and so forth. But address the emotion. And this new take in this book, I felt, is something which qualifies you as a climate psychologist. Why do you write this book? Can you relate this idea of climate activists, psychological emphasis now?
I'm not sure, but I will think about it. Thank you so much. Also, thank you so much for having me and having us. It's really nice to be here. Also, with this terrifying big picture camera. It's very huge, Okay. Yeah. Never mind. I will work with it. I don't very angry that I do too, Nikolaj, so it's much. Okay.
Maybe it was for the side.
Yeah. So let's get back to the book. You mentioned that it's my fifth book, so I would say there's a bit of a development to it, right? So the first book that I wrote about the climate was it was a storytelling book. It was almost like a handbook on the living movement, because I wrote this book and then others at me presented Fridays for Future, and I found myself writing about climate movements while I started the climate movement. So it's a very hands-on how to do activism book, and it's very necessary and useful at that time. And then I wrote a different book. One of them was with my grandmother, actually our grandmother, because my cousin is here, and so I have many cousins, but we all agree she's the coolest of us, so I'm a bit nervous. And so I wrote a book with our grandmother, and we kind of digged into our feeling of our sensation of being overwhelmed in the world. And so this book could only exist now, this and it could exist because there were other books before, and it could also exist only because I've written books about the facts and the hard technological data we need, which is crucial. It's a big part of the climate story. And yet I felt that before I started writing that, I felt almost a pain in my body about this absurd bias on how we talk about the climate. That we've gotten so good in talking about data and percentages and molecules, and how we've internalized preaching about the greenhouse effect and how which desert will transform to be a different desert, and how which ocean rise will make other oceans rise. All these things. We've gotten so good in talking about everything that is out there as if it wouldn't also be in here. And it struck me really that we expect people to respond to everything that we name out there without ever defining how that response is supposed to start and where it is supposed to come from. And I think that is why this book has became this retreat almost from the world out there to the world in here, to understand it is one effectively, and what we do as people and how we live and how we speak and how we feel is only a mirror of what is happening in the world out there. And when we talk about devastation of ecological systems, we talk about devastations of our own values just as much. And so I didn't intend to change my profession or anything, and it just felt so. It just made so much sense to me to acknowledge that the separation between the world out there and the world in here, in different classes, in different talks, in different professions, is driving us to destroy them effectively.
When we talk about teachings, we say there's no external transformation or inner change, kind of echoing what you were saying. I also found this quote by, I guess it was by Kamsky, the old word is dying, the new one is not yet there. That is a kind of nonsense.
Which is, by the way, a quote that people say from Schultz, and Nikolaj would know this better, but I don't actually think you can prove it, but yeah, it's a quote, and we give it to Kamsky.
My point is, what have been in the past pure inner monsters? The outer monsters are out there, but today we'll talk about the inner monsters. I come to this same also in a minute. In your own journey, you were born in Hamburg, you were raised in a caring environment, education, then slowly, gradually, by your grandmother, maybe your mother, you were in the space of becoming activist in a way. As a young girl, what were your inner drives? It's unjust what's happening out there. There's this anxiety and the world is dying. What are your inner drives away to go in this environment of journey? Ladies and gentlemen, let's fix it. Luisa is known on the global stage now. Luisa is in the news almost every 2 days. In this climate space, it's something to be a public figure, also being so public that you also face not only criticism, but even, I would say, in a way harassment, in a way of, but also, which is also very personal. And you have to send it anyway to survive not only externally, but also internally. So my point is, what, maybe if you don't talk about monsters, but what is the inner power which keeps you going this way? I mean, you are 29, and you experience things in your 20s some people never experience in their late 40s. Being so publicly well-known in tech, in space like this. So what is the key to keep the driving, pursuing this? Delusion.
I mean, these two questions, right? What brings you to a point that you care so much, that you risk so much, and break out of systems or patterns or something? And there's a different question, which is about what keeps you going. And I think I would very much separate that in a sense, because I talk about courage, about mood a lot in the book, and I found that one of the most crucial things that I had to learn about courage is that it's not about doing something, but it's then not backing down after you've done it. That is where you need courage. Doing one thing in a moment, that's one thing. That's about being okay with risk. But then standing your ground and defending what you did even, or that is where you need courage. And I think that is the two sides of what I experienced. One was going out there and starting a movement with others and speaking up and discussing with politicians and being there. That was one thing, and I think what was almost harder than that starting all these things was then deciding to keep going, even though it got very difficult and even dangerous.
Even dangerous?
Yeah, I mean, physically dangerous, emotionally, and so on. And I would say it's almost like two parts of the story, right? One story is, I think, the story that many people share. You grow up and suddenly you see something's going really wrong with the world, and then you gaslight yourself into believing, well, someone else will fix it, and what can I do? And then you realize, well, actually, you know, it doesn't look like that, and then you kind of turn around and get a bit more panicky about these things, and you realize, oh, kind of going really bad. And then at some point you feel like, actually, I can't turn away, but I don't want to turn away because it would mean I have to gaslight myself and my feelings and my sensations all day, every day, which is a very exhausting thing to do. And you realize actually you don't want to turn away, you turn towards it, and then you maybe realize that someone will fix it means you gotta do something, right? Someone is always on itself. And then you do something and you realize it's stupid, you do something else, and then you find this one person that does something really exciting, and you never thought, I could do this too, and then you realize actually, I can do that too, and then you do that. I mean, that's what I did. And then I think the second phase starts, where you realize it's not just this one interesting adventure or action, and it's not this thing that I do one time and I go back to my life, but I want this to become my life, or at least part of my life, and I want to grow around this, and I want to keep going, and I want others to join me. And that is where you need a different motivation, I find, which is less about doing something with fun and, you know, daring to do something, but finding some deep sense of fulfillment, of strength, of rest, sometimes even of company. And all these things, they have to be earned. We have to work for them in order to feel at least good enough to keep going. And I find that in activism, we often talk about this first phase because we need to activate people and we need to get people somewhere and we want them to show up for that one thing. And it's great that we talk about these things. But I do think maybe it's time to talk about the second phase a bit more intensely, because we right now need people to keep going because it's tough out there and it's not the green wave that we're all surfing on. We're seeing, you know, in the ecology, in terms of democracy, we find ourselves losing big time again and again and again. We also win, but we also lose these days. And so we need to create a space where people feel like, I'm going to do all that, I'm going to commit even more, even though we erase the factor of success for a single moment and come back to why we do this, other than immediate gain. And yeah, that's what I am.
Thank you for those reflections, for the personal reflection. I guess this is something, Nikolaj, if I may turn to you. You were there as a young person, woman on her way to re-stitch in a way and unlearn and relearn a new type of selfhood, a new type of constructing the self in the Anthropocene. We talked about self-leadership in the Anthropocene. And for the ones who read the book, of course, it's clear, but for the ones who didn't, this guy wakes up in his Paris flat, he gets on a journey, realizing we all sleep not well in the Anthropocene. One of the very strong sentences at the beginning of the book, page 5 or 6 or something, and saying, I'm not just a victim, I'm also part of the game. I'm on a journey to reconfigure what it could mean in terms of justice, in terms of freedom. And this type of journey in your own career, if I may ask the same question like Luisa, I'm not relabeling you as a sociologist, a psychologist, but what made you write this book? What made you go in this area of ecological thinking or rethinking? Because he has a professorship for modern social theory and ecological thinking. Correct. At Aarhus Architecture Department. What made you go in this area in terms of your journey?
The topic in general, yeah, that's a good question. Well, already 10, 12 years ago, when I was a sociology student, very interested in actually very classical German critical theory of the heart destabilize that tradition, that discipline completely. So I thought, well maybe I should go in that direction. Afterwards I should educate myself. I met a great thinker called President Macron who took me a bit under his arms, developed a language for many of the philosophical, political aspects of the Anthropocene. And for me it was completely clear that it would be, should be in that direction that I would drive my, say, intellectual, trajectory, because there was something I read a lot about it, and it was a vacuum of understanding which it still is today. Again, from every age since 2014, the news, the knowledge, the facts, the situations have become even clearer, but still when you read that we lack a certain language for it. Again, I should read it before I first began investigating in a more classical sociological way. With Bruno, we wrote about how the question of the class struggle is changing shape. But then I turned more, should indicate to existential aspects of things, which is still really a little bit, this is what Luisa is saying, that we don't still really have either an empirical and a rate of theoretical language to understand. But again, to answer very shortly, briefly to your question, because it's completely clear for me that the ecological limitations would be the defining questions of our times. And it was something that came with such a shock compared to what my discipline of sociology had to offer theoretical tools for understanding. So that's why I went in that direction. And of course also I agree because I was simply afraid individually about being in a situation where you don't have the tools to kind of understand and to face it. So that's why I went in that direction.
I mean, in psychology we have this idea, we are shocked by something we realize in reality, then we start to deny, then we get aggressive maybe, then we start negotiating, it can't be, it's not possible. It couldn't work. And then slowly but gradually we start accepting the new, and maybe, Nikolaj, by facing the eye of the tiger, in this very moment of facing the eye of the tiger, it's absurd, it's fascinating. But if we don't reach this point, we will maybe never psychologically start redefining ourselves, a bit like Luisa said, starting negotiating with ourselves, lifestyle, what I want to do in life, in terms of purpose, to discuss the school. And one point of this message, I want you to panic, but I want you to work. I want you to, this is all your message, I guess, I read out of the book. I want you to work in terms of self-reflection, in terms of inner work. Maybe you can elaborate on what you meant in your book, a redefinition of freedom. Typically used to be negotiating man and women, now you want us to negotiate freedom with the tree next door.
We're jumping very fast to the theory now. But I'm very interested in the shock, denial, aggression, and negotiation. Because last week I was attacked in Berlin by a bunch of gangsters. And there's a real question whether that's what I'm suffering from right now. What state I'm in. New York is completely right to put up those 4 levels of different psychological modes of existence. Because that is probably what we're facing. But the thing that I sometimes feel, we jump a little bit too fast from denial and then I stop there. Before we go to the question of freedom, I want to hear a little bit about why I wrote the second book, because everything that Luisa is speaking about turns to something different, and we never really had a language also for understanding which is. But that thing we call the Anthropocene is a metamorphosis and metamorphosis, again, a mutation and transformation of the world. But by being a human being, individually, collectively driving that also means that you have changed into something different. You have changed into something. We all have become different human beings. Human beings that are today by every second they take on a drink, travel, eat, so on and so forth, leaving a destructive imprint on the earth. And I'm very interested in what that actually means existentially. To realize that if you are in your flat in Paris and it's 45-degree night, and if you turn on the ventilator, then you are, say, destabilizing your own conditions of existence. If you take a shower, then you're maybe CO2 even better, and so on and forth. So this whole feeling, exactly this, that it's a shock, denial, depression, negotiation, and you cannot escape these issues because you cannot escape yourself. And why is that interesting? It's interesting because it's completely related to the way that the old existentialists were framing questions of freedom and questions of boomerang, destabilizing your every conditions of your conditions of your livelihood. So it's about how the freedom and its external stresses is not trapping you on an earth that is going closer towards becoming uninhabitable. What does that mean in terms of ethics? What does that mean in terms of fear? What does that mean in terms of hope or hopelessness? That's why I'm very interested in this truth, and a little bit later, and I try to renegotiate a new notion of freedom that is being negotiated, to jump to the psychological setting, with other life forms and humans. But again, before we come to there, we have to understand how this completely shocks our very understanding of what it means to be a human being. Whenever step we take, it's actually slowly deteriorating the conditions of life for your own physical being. In Leipzig, if I'm not wrong, Leipzig or something else. Yeah. Or genius. Very good thing for this. He's a genius. Who said the soul is the mirror of an indestructible universe. Today, the soul is the mirror of a destructible planet. And I'm very interested in the divisions, the confusions, the fears and the trembles, the whole emotional palettes of that. Because I think before we can post it, even the most important questions that Luisa are dealing with, which are questions of the ethics, we have to understand very fundamental human condition hasn't changed. It's not a very nice human condition. But we have to have a language for it, we have to have a narrative for it. That's what I try to do in that book.
I guess you also have to let go of old patterns of thinking. Let go of all patterns of thinking in a way to say goodbye to something. When I was struck several times in the book, when you also use the term facility, this nexus between growth and even this mental masculinity, disentangle the idea of growth from its fossil roots. And when Peter Sinterreich responded to not to this book, but in his previous book, The Violence of Atos, he kind of, to me, provided conservative philosophy for activism. But I was saying this nexus facility, actually used the term, because you were the first one using the term. But this defossilization of fossil fuels to stop is not something you have to simply take an electric car and let it release it in the garage, but it goes deeper and deeper than just technological disruption. And to me, this goes to what Nikolaj said, to uncarve and show the roots of this connection between ideas of growth. The petrocapitalism of gold. Maybe you can comment on the term in the mechanism for your book. How you would disentangle this nexus, that we call it nexus.
Yes, Schultz provides a very good foundation really for the concept of facilitate, which is a really nice, doesn't translate so nicely, I find, to facility. But facilitate for me, it is not so much about facilitating growth, that I think is what they call real growth, but that's a different concept, and that will take a long time to discuss. But it's what I try to capture with the concept of facilitate is the idea that what we are in, the states that we are in, that Nikolaj just kind of outlined it is not an issue of CO2 in the atmosphere, but that is how we are treating it. One part of it is about we are overstimulating all lives and earth systems with all the stuff that we put on it. So that I would say humankind has started burning stuff 200,000 years ago, and we just can't stop. And to the point that we burn everything that we need to depend on. That is what he talks about when he talks about the pure maniacs. He would use that word also to describe Oetker, which I find very funny. But facility in that sense means our way of being, of thinking, of dreaming, of building a career, of imagining what we need, what we want, what we thrive for, all of that has been taken over by what can be traced back to fossil fuels. So that I would speak of a double forestry that we're doing right now. So we're burning underground trees, which is our coal, oil, and gas. These two trees down there. We're taking them up. We're burning that, which causes fire, which burns the forest on our planet. Double forestry. And that, in a sense, maybe illustrates this idea of what the fossility means to our being. It's not something that we do out there, it's something that we do in here. Quick example from my own life. I was 18, just got a driver's license, was really bad at driving, and didn't enjoy it, and failed prominently on the first try. And stood in front of my parents and explained to them that I wanted nothing but to do a road trip with my best friends to Spain. And my parents looked at me and said, Luisa, you don't like driving, you don't have a car, and you could just take a train. You know, don't you young people do this enjoy stuff? And I would scream at child, and I would really get my first big argument that I can remember with my parents on this road trip. And they had real safety concerns. They didn't know what we wanted with this tiny, like, friend's car without an AC and what's Spain on some roads that we don't know to do what exactly. And I couldn't explain to them why I wanted this, but I knew I really wanted this. And it freaked me out, the idea that they would want to stop me from it. They couldn't stop me in that sense, but they could, make me feel really bad about it. And eventually, I think we did settle for taking the train to Spain. And years later, I think it was more than 5 years later, I thought back to that moment when I had this big argument with my parents about this road trip. And I realized why I was so desperate for it. Because of Jennifer Aniston. Because in my whole teenage years, for me, what was a successful and a beautiful and a powerful woman was this woman that would take the car wherever she wanted, and she would open the window, do this, and the hair would fly out. You would then truly be free. That is what I would watch all the weekends with my friends when I went to high school. And no one in this road trip movie that we've all seen probably told me that this is what freedom is. But that is what every single second of this movie told me, nonetheless. They never said freedom would also be taking the train, Jennifer Aniston on that farm, waiting for the connection to come. But that is how deep down it is. We don't talk about it, we don't define it, we don't even have the words. It took me 5 years as a climate activist to figure that one out, something of the most brilliant of all thoughts. And as Nikolaj made the point about, we language narratives what's happening to the state, but also how deep it has crept into us. So that even our dreams aren't our own dreams anymore. But somewhere down the road will be a movie that is sponsored by a car manufacturer that has taken over the US, which is now, making sure that every single of those nice movies they have cast, we're paying them, we're part of it, to the point that you don't even feel it anymore. And that is, I guess, what is so dangerous about facility is that if we're not careful, if we're not paying attention, we forget what are our own dreams and longings and needs, and what are the ones that at some point fossil fuels and the so next sets the messages has planted into our everyday lives and feelings and longings and wishes.
I want to come back to this facility concept for a moment. You related to it. I was reading, of course, also as a man.
I see.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Didn't you say you assume? Didn't you say he was a man and then you say I assume?
Yeah, I didn't watch it later.
Okay.
When you wrote this chapter, you in particular related on this masculine idea of conquering, extracting, getting everything, penetrating all the masculine traits. Was a chapter against man, but it was a chapter, it's a question, facility facility, it's man-made, but the human man is male. It's male facility, basically, or Arend.
And this is very good to pick this aspect of my book, because I think if you remember correctly, what I said is, if you combine facility with the patriarchy, you get heteromasculinity, which is a term coined by Carol Daggett. And then I said something like, but that's a whole different book, and moved on. So something is like, maybe this is a question that tells us more about you than about
It's fucking of course in a way. It was only this small little passage enough for me to make it.
Maybe a good reason to let some more about that.
Of course.
I mean, it's very obvious, right, that facility has it easy because we know the patriarchy so well. You know, we know how that works, we all do it all day, and at least most of the time we have to. And so facility can thrive on that. We don't even know what was there first, but it is interesting in the sense that I find we can learn so much from feminist movements and from kind of declustering the patriarchy. If you look closely, we find so many hints that can help us to deal with the facility. You know, this idea of that patriarchy means it's not just men have more power, but like structurally they earn more statistically, but it means that if we are in a room together, it's just more likely that we listen more to men and to women, and we concentrate better when a man speaks and compared to what a woman says. Patriarchy, these are the things that you can't even measure so well. You wouldn't maybe even notice if we wouldn't have beautiful technology kind of figuring that one out. We know statistically that even if you have a kind of a conference and there's an equality on like how many men and women will do some presentations, we know statistically men still want to speak more at this conference because they are more engaged in the questions, they speak longer, they take more room every day. And I'm not saying that to, well, I'm just saying that it is good to know, I guess, but it's also that facility means even in a place where maybe we are fully climate neutral and we're solar powered and we have heat pumps and we have all the beautiful things, and if the pictures hung up at the wall of Oetker and so on, it's still likely that we are getting coffee.
By a woman.
Wow, okay. Yeah, all these things are. Thank you so much. Thank you. It is still likely that we dream fossil fuel, that our dreams are fossil fuel, even though there's a solar energy on our roof, because we've been trained to dream these things and these are everywhere. And this is, I think, why the patriarchy is not just, oh, beautiful thing, and I expect you to say this tonight, but the patriarchy is just part of the problem. It can also help us solve some of the problems.
That's what that is I would hear.
Oh yeah, I guess so.
Thank you for this reflection. When I said we have to say goodbye and say farewell to some ideas before we start with new ones.
You use a very beautiful term, exclamation. Exclamation, so that's the opposite of innovation. Exclamation, goodbye, say goodbye to others.
Which also part of the university like us, to say goodbye, farewell to all concepts which are there for centuries almost.
And we're usually not really good at that. We're very good, there's a great culture about innovation and invention. You know, we all want to be a startup about something and found it and about something new, which is, you know, it's beautiful, but I think it's sometimes very useful and the most attractive thing to join something that already exists. But also there's just bias to say goodbye to stuff that, you know, have done us a great service, but maybe they shall go. And there's, in particular, actually in Germany, I find it's, compared to other countries in the region, we're quite bad at saying goodbye to things. We have a terrible culture about loss, about grief. You know, you go to a funeral, which is usually a bad place to be, and then everyone's supposed to be happy immediately after. You know, and other places will take weeks and weeks and weeks to have supper together and to celebrate together and to do all these beautiful things in the culture we introduced to learn how to say goodbye. in Germany, we have a bad culture of failure. If something doesn't work out, you can start new. You're not someone who's a risk, but you're someone who failed. And I guess that's all these things that we see learn when it comes to ecology as well. You need to say goodbye to so many things, to fossil fuel ideas, but also habits, to ways of thinking, to maybe divesting even some part of our language, or at least adding new language to it. And all these things obviously don't get easier if you combine that with a culture where people have never really learned to say goodbye in a meaningful and, Yes, exactly.
Appreciate what has been, what worked in the past, but what might not work today or tomorrow anymore. An easy way out these days is books. Taylor, for example, to re-embrace indigenous cultures, to relearn what has been born centuries ago. I want to open up and also turn again to Nikolaj. If we say goodbye to all ideas, we also have to have new propositions, new concepts, new narratives, become a good narrative, or public ill narrative, something we need to push forward the chair, the chair. But let's look at explore the emotional landscape. If you say goodbye to something, you say hello to others. When you just said with seeing a movie with the air open in the car, this is freedom, Luisa has disciplined you to destroy your illusion. It was never a feeling. It was the feeling others did help you to develop your mind. It was what if a lawyer tells us about emotional capitalism, we own our feelings, we are kind of seduced, socialized, we have a feeling because it's good for the market, it's good for revenues, it's good for profits. Also, we need to pretend it. And it's more an emotional landscape. You might also consider historically speaking, some emotions are history. Other emotions will show up in the landscape. For example, nobody 20 years ago would talk about climate change. 200 years ago, before globalization, nobody would talk about distant suffering. Even the notion of shame itself, in Aristotelian sense, was a different notion than it is today. So emotions are products of historical development. Currently, we have this emotional capitalism, what marketeers try to tell us what makes us good. And based on this diagnosis, Nikolaj, what's making new landscape? What type of emotion would you say this is something you aspire to beyond anxiety, fear, and trembling? Is there always some new category, some language emerging in your discourse, in sociology, in your own writings?
Of course, there's tons of new terms and concepts and so on and so forth that trying to describe it. Again, climate anxiety, climate grief, climate fear, solar nostalgia, all these terms is of course part of this structuring of the emotional landscape. Again, what I'm most interested in is the thing that happens existentially behind it. But yeah, you're completely right. I mean, of course, the best and most famous example is probably solar nostalgia. I'm guessing another way for positive emotions because we're yet to find them. Solar nostalgia, the feeling of seeing the territory nevertheless still imagine that right around the corner after fascism would still be the ideals, the ethical horizons that he was always so close to: progress, freedom, growth, the whole liberal dream. But imagine if you were sitting, our situation here today is a lot worse, because it's actually the victory of these emotions that has come back, that has left you trapped on a planet. And again, to answer your question, I don't think it's the feelings of fear, guilt, shame, so on and so forth that is different, but it's the very lack of horizon out of it that we are missing today, exactly because of what we so finally refers to as facility. But what do you think? It's always good to ask somebody in the middle. What do you think? But do you think as a psychologist that new, like real new emotions?
Yes. Okay. The concept teaches that only 5% of emotions are universal. All the other ones are part of culture and history. Take Vatican. Take hysteria. Maybe for always exaggerated. Seeing ladies in their just falling, being fainted. But nevertheless, the history of emotion, we are also diverged. Can be sure. And it's not very interesting. The universal ones are disgust, fear, anger, pleasure, but not so many. All the other ones, for example, collectivistic societies, the notion of shame is a different one than in liberal societies. Therefore, I really hope on your work that we will gradually, we cannot force it to have to do work, what we call do. It's our German.
We like that one. We like that one.
We like that one.
We like that one.
We like that one.
We like.
We like it.
Yeah.
Of course, I do. But so the mics are not so well. We like it, but we also like new language. Maybe the media have responsibility. See, media have huge responsibility for language. But I think emotions have to merge, they will merge. Beyond nostalgia. We can be very bittersweet. Even the Vatican, very nice good feeling. Because you feel bittersweet. There will be once emergence. I was asking if there always something on the horizon. On your horizon, you're thinking, your work. I believe in 50 years' time, we have few words for new words. Otherwise, we cannot come to terms with it. Like in therapy, if you don't face evil, if you don't look in the eye of sky, or your words, not the eye of the time, we have different words.
I say stay with the trouble.
Stay with the trouble.
Facing things, yeah.
And he even says embracing contradictions in your book.
Yes.
Meaning, there will be some new, hopefully, new language out there. And beyond marketing, it's not just to convince people that it's better for them not to, but on a positive note, rather go in that direction.
If that's what you need to do, emotions, yeah, sure, of course you'll find other modes of connecting with the world, hopefully, somewhere along the way, other ways of feeling what also called resonance, probably. What I was mentioning before was just simply if it is what is behind the emotions or if it's emotions and stuff. But you're probably right, it's a very interesting question. But there'll probably arrive an emotion of stuck, of feeling stuck, like a new sort of claustrophobia or something like that. I think actually that's what the whole book Lansing is about. But it's very interesting what you ask it, because I think we'll jump a little bit quickly ahead to what Luisa is working on, but because it's not really important before we understand how to be courageous, how to cope, how to, of course, act. We're sitting with the Queen of Action, so action is, of course, the most important thing. But before you act, before you have to situate yourself, and I think one of the most defining emotions of today is probably even confusion. I think that's actually what we are circling around here. I mean, Luisa says that the right everything today is spread out through a universe of emotional imaginaries that are facilitated, that are, as I would say, a little bit less theoretically precise, based on a certain idea of freedom, right? So yeah, before we can somehow find out how to restitch our life stories or our emotional existential being, we have to have a description of how it's fractured
In your book, and I might quote from this book, you go even further. You say, if I may read it out in German, wenn ich meine Freiheit zurückhaben will, kann das nur durch die Nutzung und Pflege von Verbindungen und Beziehungen zu allen Menschlichen und nichtmenschlichen Wesen geschehen, die eine Entfaltung der Erfahrung von Selbstbestimmung und eine Art, Achtung, Heteroautonomie erlauben. Dann wird Freiheit in der Tat ethisch erlebt, als in einem anderen Ich selbst sein. Auch die anderen werden hier erweitert und umfassen Elemente, die zuvor nicht als Teil dieser Sphäre verstand. In other words, should I show empathy with the tree next door? With the stone?
I have to see what you're reading. No, it's just to go back to the thing. Of course, our fundamental value of leadership is, speaking of today, the fundamental of a lot of Western civilization, of course, there's a lot of very more clever civilizations that didn't have freedom as the main concept. But if we accept the idea that what has been, legitimizing collective social orders and modernity, as Habermas would say, is freedom, and also on an individual level, of course, the main concept behind being a modern is freedom. It's essentially ethically, psychologically, even aesthetically, we are so connected to this notion that I consider it absolutely impossible to just say, no, we go away from freedom. I mean, my problem here is that we have to take a little detour, because my whole problem with this question is that the last 50 years, every time there was an economist who stepped up on stage, they say, no, we can't have freedom anymore. It's impossible to escape freedom. The earth will always lose if it's at the expense of freedom. Ecology, the earth, the planetary system will always be sacrificed at the altar of freedom, if we have to take that discussion. But luckily, freedom has not only meant one thing through history, luckily freedom has meant a million of different things through the history of ideas, through the history of different cultures. I can certainly tell you that Elon Musk's idea is not the same idea about freedom as Hegel, and so on and so forth. Of course, you had all the liberals, John Locke, Adam Smith, Thomas Hobbes, who understood freedom what they would call the negative sense of freedom as a lack of constraints. You have the whole Kantian idea of freedom as an. You heard anything? You can't do like that.
By the way, can you hear us in the background? So it's fancy. Can you hear us?
I'm going to send you out. What I'm saying is that then again, there's tons of different notions of freedom that is legitimized, that has been nurtured through history. Our, let's say, not right now hegemonical or dominant notion of freedom, but what the Danish author stated, the German author stated, is actually a social notion of freedom stemming from somebody like Hegel again, for whom you realize that freedom is always something you have to negotiate with other people and realize for the social relationship, and that is my mind.
By the way, I love this page in particular, it's like one of my favorites.
Yeah,
and it just says we have to negotiate with other people. And then here on this page you say you have to also negotiate with the tree next door.
No, what I'm saying is that in the social notion of freedom, that's also from Hegel, then you have to realize freedom through the relationship to others. What I'm trying to do in that book, in this sentence before he said no, is simply to question, to repose the notion, if we can really invent a new sense of freedom, where you see freedom in relationship to the other life form that the condition should have. Be it, as you said, be it all the different things that conditions your existence. Again, what I'm only saying is back to the question, what is freedom if you can't breathe there? That's what I'm saying.
If you follow this line of thinking, and you see this on a global scale already, the countries to equip, for example, trees or forests or lakes or mountains with own rights. This could be a way.
That's a very good question, but for me it's a very different question. But I would to quickly pick up on Nikolaj's notion and come back to the rights of nature. I think it was very interesting. But I think Nikolaj made a point that I know you told me that there's a bit of a startup energy and we're not is a recurring issue and a theme in my work and in my writing is that it is not just that we have to kind of wait for something new to come, a new emotion, a new mode, a new norm or something, but that we are quite well equipped with emotions and with sensations that have, however, been buried by facility, by foster norms, ideas, dreams. Take the notion of freedom, how that is used in modern politics to justify fossil fuel destruction, right? What in theater is happening on German highways because apparently freedom starts 200 kilometers per hour, no less. It's so funny, right? If it wasn't also serious, it would be really funny that is what, they made out of the big thinkers and all the big ideas about histories and civilization that collapsed over the struggle for freedom, and all that, some make out of it is this kind of tiny thing that is happening on the Azim. I mean, you know what I mean? It's not that we have to reinvent everything, but at some point I would, in a very paradoxical manner, encourage to dig back to what we already have, and maybe get excited about uncovering or decluttering some of these emotions. Thinking about children, you're the psychologist in the room, right? And how children spend their days outdoors, and they would, look at the plants and look at the trees, and they would, if the parents would litter, they would say, well, it's a forest, don't do that. And how we've normalized in a very tragic way that we unlearn that connection, that we very naturally expect children to have, because they haven't yet learned to hate and exploit and destruct everything around them. They haven't taken over in terms of speed. They're growing at the same pace as a tree is, so there's much more of a natural connection to it. And so it's not that we have to learn everything new, but I would propose to unlearn a lot of things, and that includes our interpretation of emotions, of what we made out of our feelings, and how also we are, as I mentioned earlier, constantly gaslighting ourselves and in our ways of life. Asking around, we go tonight, we go to like a raise of hand thing, how many people here in the room would feel like they would actually like to spend more time in nature and what we have left out there, right? I would assume the majority here would feel that it's, kind of like that. Who here has been in a difficult situation in their life and found they need clarity, so they went outdoors to breathe in, to see the trees, to hear the wind? How many here had moments in their life that they really connect to that very mountain, that very sea, that very lake, that very river? So much of our lives, our emotional being, of our stories, of what we tell ourselves, what we remember, what is kind of kept in our hearts, has to do with the world, and usually not the built world, but the lived world and the natural world. These what we interpret that to be. And yet, we will lives and careers and homes and all these things quite disconnected from it. I don't think we don't need for the miracle to happen until we invent all these new things. But looking closely at what is already there and how much energy it is taking from us to live against what we kind of feel a lot of the times, and how much of that energy we could maybe reinvest wisely if we stopped blinding ourselves down.
I would less optimistic with the spectrum, which I mean some good, but at least some parts.
Sorry, the nature rights. Sorry, I forgot about the question. But I mean, that is one. I think Nikolaj probably has thoughts to that as well, because to me it's we sign document after document, basically signing our own stability. I mean, we're destroying our only home and our only planet to a degree that we need to equip the planet to be better, to resist against us. I mean, it's also stupid, and in that very logic, I think it obviously makes sense to equip not only human bodies, but also natural bodies with rights, so that we can kind of here today, the planet kind of rising up against us. imagining that we are quicker to go to court against ourselves than, rethink if we maybe, can change course a bit earlier on the road. Settling.
When we have this kind of research on our school, people talk about whether we should quit major rights, this kind of thing. In the law system, many systems would have to change. It's not just the technology that we thought, it's also things. From sociology point of view, Nikolaj, we say history needs to carry the subject of history. And in your book with Natur, the version of the ecological class, this was the idea that it's just a working class version of the ecological class across different ideologies, being a carrier of those ideas. These are just articulated. What about the ecological class? Can you really remember this? The ecological class, the role of Natur, can you really explain this concept behind? It's not just a working class, but your high class, it's a new actor.
We were a little bit questioning this whole pedagogical vision on political action and ecologists, no matter how critical of work the Green parties in their view. In the last 50 years, we've always had this feeling that of this narrative, this discourse, this telltale that ecology was a question of peace. Soon, we all know the facts and so on, will walk hand in hand and save Mother Nature. But of course, we see everywhere. We see when we said fighting Luisa or against the highway, we see the indigenous people that we spoke about before, we were having that land taken over because of production and so on and so forth. And this is not a question of peace. Ecology does not make peaceful situation, it creates division, which is of course very right. But what we argue on the emergence of Swedish and ecological class, we argue that actually the division that ecology brings with it is not a bad thing, because if you look at it historically, then narratives of division, narratives of conflict has actually been very useful in generating political action. And what we then argue with a historical connotation or historical reference frame to the whole working class, to the whole notion of class, is that actually today we are seeing a new sort of class struggle in the emergence of a new class that does simply fighting to take over the means of production, fighting to keep the means of production as in the socialist, liberal history, 19th, 20th century, but that we see the emergence of a new political subject. It could be called a fight against the very horizon of production, against the very horizon of growth, for the sake of growth, and who fights for simply maintaining the conditions of habitability either on a local or on a planetary level. So here we simply used to use a historical connotation or historical comparison to declare, and it's not very positive to say, but to declare conflict, because conflict is already there. So,
is there a little test for the audience whether or not a member of this ecological class, but they want to test themselves and then open from the floor? Is there a test?
No. We can't make out the membership, I would say. We're not in a position to have a criteria for being a member.
If you could now prepare to open the floor, the audience, and then some questions with the mic, with the video, providing the mic. So please feel free to enter this conversation. Took us at some point try to work hard on this and work. Try to. Please, there's the first question.
It's not a new question, it was more of something I found, like, we talked a lot about unlearning research, and I recently published a book which is about the future of identity, and for me it was really hard to dig deep into unlearning, like there's not really a German word for unlearning, and it's not really because it adds something. Like for me, it was a little bit like watching Bob Ross. There's no CCC moment, and like you see the perfect landscape, you think, okay, that's a nice picture, it belongs hanging on the wall. But then he takes out the blue brush and just, there's a moment, and then the CCC recognizes it as something bigger than the picture we thought, and it's already perfectly wrong. But with only the excellent innovation, there was something I want to share with you. They took a Lego bridge, and on the right hand side there were 3 pieces of Lego, and on the left hand side was 4, and then they handed it over to adults, and also these fix the bridge. And it was about 80% of the adults who, rather than taking the brick away, they added one on the right hand side, so it was, and which is more problems with stability because of both wires, more transportation, more resources, and then they did the same with kids. And kids reacted in a different way, where they took away the stone rather than adding more. And this is called the addition bias. We trained that adding something is like a plus, by taking away something it's a loss. And it's an addition bias. So, yeah, that's mine.
Just a comment.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody else.
To be very honest, the comments are very bad at education, but that was a very useful comment. Thank you.
But just to understand, it was only the kids didn't need to add something, only the adults.
No, they handed the bridge to adults, and about 80% they added it. And then they did the same with kids, and kids were like, for them it wasn't a loss to take a brick away, so they had to put away and so.
Yeah, that's fascinating. The same thing you said before, these are something we're not naturally built for production as such. It's not a general fundamental ontological thing. It's very interesting thing because I was trying to write something at the time about if you ask people, okay, you were in the streets of Paris and they say, okay, let's try to turn off all the lights and the shots at night. People have a serious anxiety about that idea, as if the world is becoming smaller. So I think what you were saying about what you were saying is very interesting beyond the physical level, that they completely naturalize the idea of more at the expense of something else. Because what's really true about what you're saying is that if you don't add another brick, then there's more air, right? And if you don't turn on the lights in the city, then there's more insects or something like that. So we've completely confused production with there being more in the world. It's just different, but still. And the very consumption and production that you're speaking about, the adults, the men, it's a very fascinating example of that, if you see what I mean. Where is it from? Is it Denmark? Did you say it was Lego?
No, it was the University of Pennsylvania.
America, of course.
Are there more questions?
I would.
Yes.
Just take the floor. I have a question to the psychological aspects. We have the developmental goals, the 26, whatever, you know it better. And I read sometime that there's, we know them, as you told, we know them since years, and nothing happens, not enough is happening. And some people develop the inner developmental goals, the IDGs, and when you mentioned doing unlearning, resetting, getting back to some sort of roots maybe, this is really a very interesting concept. I thought we could talk about it, but now I see it right now, so this is really nice concept. And if someone is here to discuss it, I think it would be perfect to catch.
I only agree that it's good.
There's also a question over here, just to bring more justice to the microphone on the left-hand side.
I can also talk like this. I just wanted to give a thought how to overcome this phase of attack in this change process of reaching a new world or coming back to our stable world.
as a species, we are so dependent on the well-being of our planet and we just haven't even started to comprehend what it means that we're disrupting what we depend on every single day. Like, you know, we go to doctors maybe every 2 months or so, but we go to a farmer 3 times a day, technically. That is how we live and thrive, and we destroy everything right now. And it doesn't help that we now have less information and radicals, and obviously fossil fuel industry is joining together with radicals because they know that if democracy wins, we will go to climate targets and we're going to phase out fossil fuels, and that's bad for their profits. Obviously, they have realized that fake news and enemies of democracy are great for their profits, so it's no, it's no wonder that they've spent dozens of millions of dollars electing Donald Trump and all these things. So I think we need to maybe for a moment divest from that idea that it's a tough year or a tough few years and then we're going to get somewhere. But for now, at least in many aspects, it's going to get very, very tough. And I say that not because I want to, ruin everyone's nights, but I think it helps to, at some point, let go of an illusion that is really stopping us from looking some crisis in the eyes. And that's going to make it very, very tough as societies, but as individuals also have to stay sane. You know, if Gramsci's back at the time of nonsense, and we see that Gramsci, people really turn crazy. And we literally turn crazy, and how many of us have in the last years found that they are his one family member that you can't really talk to anymore, but now it's getting more and more and more. And that is just in a circle. And I think there's probably great people here that have done all the science on how outer crises are often turning into inner crises. We know that a year after a cyclone hits on an island, the divorce rate is so up. Because what's out there is getting into the most inner parts of our community, which obviously not helpful because we need stability in those relationships, and those are the ones who suffer if we don't prepare well. So now what is happening, I think, the first thing I propose is to adjust to the notion that it's going to be tough, and that we need people to show up right now, even though we don't know that there's some rising inside. The second thing is, I think that is where Nikolaj and Neubauer make this very important point, it's not a walk on sunshine. There's no peace without conflict. So we are not all standing on the same side. There are some who want more crises. We know that there's parties in Germany, right extremist people in our parliaments that want more catastrophe and crisis to happen because it helps their propaganda and their politics, because they profit from insecurity and chaos. So they have no interest in, preventing crisis we can prevent. They want us to run into them. It's not that we have convinced all of the states because they have signed some climate agreements and now we're all going to dance into climate utopia, and the only problem right now is Donald Trump. We are not on the same side of the story. We are not all sitting on the same table. Most of us aren't sitting on any table at all in that picture. And we right now do not know who's going to win this. We're going to win at some point, but we're not going to know if it's enough. So, what do we do if we find ourselves in this as individuals? And we kind of want to do our bit, but we're also exhausted and tired. And we're kind of scared to get attacked and to get backlash. And we don't want to be this angry person in the room and the annoying one at every party that people turn to be like, well, it's not going to go well for you, right? Because you care about the planet. We don't want to be that person. I'm the person already, but it's not used to me. And I propose the following. Imagine we're going to spend every single year of our lives in a state of emergency, because that is what the climate emergency is about. It's not always going to be equally bad and hard, and it's not going to be equally bad for everyone. I mean, we are among the most privileged of all. But imagine for the rest of our life, this thing is going to be there. And all things connected, the radical issues and the inequality issues and the heat wave issues, all these things. Imagine for the rest of our life that's going to be there. Wouldn't it be the greatest investment, not in the world out there, but in the world in here, to find a mode to deal with that is sustainable and that is not exploiting ourselves. If it's not going to be there anyway, might right now turn to it and find a relationship. We put ourselves as ins Verhältnis zur Welt. If we do this now, which is going to be exhausting, we're going to get to this mode of attack and all these things, we will benefit from it for so long. Because we have found, at least, or we started to find a way of coexisting with something that we shouldn't have to coexist with, in a way that doesn't gaslight us, or in a way that makes us feel numb and excluded, but in a way that makes us feel included and powerful, at least to some degree, in ownership of that, of our own feelings in the world and hear the world like that. We don't know who's going to win what fight, and we're not going to know what's going to go on here in 20 years. And it's really scary, but I think we're going to know that we will need to figure out these things now, as long as it's not too bad. And I can only recommend, from my experience, starting soon and starting early and starting with friends, and rolling up sleeves and getting ready to fight when we have to fight things mentally and morally or emotionally or sometimes in politics. Because it's, it's not just the word there that needs us, but it's the word here that really needs us to figure that out soon.
The journalists can ask you so many questions and we don't have to realize Mars is more interesting than planet Earth. But where does this fascination come from? A couple of years days later, I was invited to do a talk at actually the same architecture school that I was later hired on. I was writing an article about why it was very problematic to go there. I didn't think we had to seriously discuss it, but I said this because one of the guys who was working with Elon Musk on building on Mars was coming. I said, okay, then we can finally start discussing it and so on and so forth. Until the day before, where I was told by the people that had invited me that the actual owner of the company was coming himself, not only a representative, so they had to cancel my talk. So I was planetarily cancelled as the first person in history. Nonetheless, these two little issues tells us something about the very fact that there is a fascination about us. There is a fascination of elsewhere. There is a fascination of escapism. Where does that come from? My guess would be that it's because it's presented as a continuation of the, I guess that's why you're asking, continuation of the modern project. It's about discovery. It's about progress. All these things that we've all been nurtured, very related to facility, to dream up that there is a next phase. So it's a modernistic project. But think about it. Again, modernism had three pillars to stand on. First of all, it was collective. Second of all, it was forward in space. And third, it was forward in time. You don't have to be a genius to realize that this is not collective. It's for the few people on the rocket, right? So it's not collective. Two, it's not really forward in space, because even if you add space, have you seen baby planet Mars? It's half the size of Earth. It's a small, stupid planet. You shouldn't even go up there. Thirdly, it's something forward in time. Because Mars looks like Earth did before life arrived on Earth. Is it that planet? It's a regressive move. So the question is still what we're considering. Right? My whole point is that it's not even modern. It's not a collective project. What it is an escapism for the few. And we know that very clearly right now that this is the people that want to go to Mars, who wants to build bunkers, who wants to build sea steps, who wants to destroy the notion of the state, Peter Thiel and all these guys. So rather, I mean, hypothetically, we cannot live there. It's impossible. We have one planet, and then we have to declare war on those who want to go elsewhere. Because it's like being at a party. I know it's been a very long story. I'm only waking up. Don't worry. It's like being at a party, you know? The party really sucks. There's not a lot of food. There's not a lot of drinks. The music is a little bit out of tune. We don't know what happens. A few parties come saying, "We want to stay here." The party sucks. Let's go somewhere else. I know places, so on and so forth. But if you went with those people, then you of course know that if you go to another party, it's even more dead than the party which was there before. So these people want you to take it somewhere else. By the way, always the same people who drank all the beers and turn the music up so loud that we can't even speak together anymore. We should just say, go, run, you're free. Have a nice trip to the party. They're not going to get in if the Dutch is already there. What actually destroys the party is not that there's not a lot of food, it's not that there's not a lot of music, it's that there's people making you dream about another place, right? So I would say, stop your hypothesis, stay here with us.
I would actually explain the same, it just happened with other words. So when you were talking about the state of the world, and it was so painful and so desperate to hear those things, and I'm so scared when I'm confronted with what's happening. And then you were all the time talking about emotions, but what has happened is we talk about them, and we try to name them, and to understand them, give them names, but actually when they are here, when you told us how desperate the situation is, you did what everybody is doing, you just changed the subject. So it's actually much smaller than this. It's not really about escapism and stuff, but it's just like very, very quickly stop from where the emotion is. You talked all the time about how we have to deal with this, how we need to stay sane in complicated times. And I'm sorry, it's just as an example, everybody's doing the same, but this is exactly how we don't stay sane, by avoiding the emotions that arise, by being in denial. And everything we do is always just different kinds of avoiding emotions. So I really think we get these narratives wrong. We talk about logically and reasonably, but we really, really have to start feeling emotions.
but you should not stop it. It's okay, because this is how the brain works, how we are socialized. And we should not say, you are not that far already, you are not at that level of consciousness. It's okay to be confused. It's okay not to feel lost in a way. Yeah, we just say not to stop at this point.
I think that's not correct.
Can I just explain? I'm a therapist myself, so it's normal to be scared and it's normal to be avoided, and we have to learn to stop doing exactly this, because then we can't deal with anything if we keep being in denial. It's normal that we are, but it's not normal that we have to stay there. We have to learn to feel emotions and stop being in denial.
I think you make a very crucial point, because I would separate maybe two issues here. One is existence of different modes and emotions, and that more like the experts in the room are definitely not us who here, but that's US. But there's another question that is about making space for sitting with an emotion and maybe normalizing it. And I guess, most people have been in the situation that they had a conversation with someone and you then got scared that they would start crying or something. For just a moment you felt like, oh, that would be awkward. Please don't do that. And I find that is a very good reminder of what is going wrong, right? It's just tears, it's just feeling, it's technically even a good sign that someone dares to feel that, right? And so you're like, oh, wow. And I think that is the same situation with when it comes to all the emotions in the room, when it comes to the planet, that you get almost trained to behaving a certain way to it that is, socially more acceptable than what maybe might be necessary or feel real about it. And so it very resonates how you talk about it, how in Islamic movement it was the pandemic for the first time that taught us that we need to make space for emotions. Before that we were just working and doing all these things and we can feel tomorrow, And then suddenly we would sit there with all our different emotions, we would find ourselves unable to work because the pandemic was so difficult to comprehend and everyone was so confused and overwhelmed that we felt like we actually can't work if we don't make space for how we feel with that. And I feel that in terms of climate we're quite a long way out. And the best, or what symbolizes that I find most is the climate conference. An average climate conference would be 95%, talks on like CCS and capturing emissions there and building solar here and investing in green technology, and 5%, it's my calculation, is a climate anxiety, meditation and nature, or yoga for the yoga people. As if we were 5% human and 95% engineers in front of an engineering problem that we have to fix.
When I started this conversation by providing this kind of terms about wisdom, I also had in mind the book, you said, stop with all those have to and shoulds. And you just said, we have to accept. I don't think that's the way it works. I don't know you, of course I don't know you. But there's a reason why he is at this point. It's adult development, it's consciousness, it is a good friend. And I read your book, Overcoming the Schultz, and saw the Lucy.
Yeah, that was, I think, if I may interrupt at that point, because I think that's taking a bit out of context why I said we should stop with the Schultz and the have-tos. I wasn't interfering with a professional therapist, but with the political approach, which is heavily inspired by Nikolaj's work, that the climate movement for too long, I feel, focused on just being right, and nothing is more boring and more uninspiring than coming into a room and being, getting lazy on just being right. Yes, we are right in the sense that we have the science in our back, and that we have climate targets, and we win at courts, and technically we are right, and we have the right to do certain things, but that doesn't create change. And so coming into a room with this idea of you have to do this or Bundes has to do that is something that's good to say, but it tricks you into getting boring, lazy, and uninspiring in your work. And so that's why I would heavily propose to not focus so much on what we have to do because we are right, but on what we want to change and how we want to do it and what we are longing for, what we are dreaming of, and how we envision a better future.
We are right in darkness, but we are not right in darkness. Because being the owner of historical truths in history always failed.
No, it's very legally spoken.
Legally spoken.
Yeah. Or even politically, maybe you could say in analytics, you know? If you say, say Germany has to get rid of coal, oil, and gas, I can say that because we have signed UN declarations saying that, and all of the international systems that we've built up for climate negotiations, have come to the conclusion. But it doesn't create a pathway on how to get there. And that is what it is.
I would like to continue, but there are more questions for the audience. First row, then the cousin wants to talk.
The cousin.
First of all, thank you very much.
So, first of all, thank you very much. And as I interpret your work, it's about kind of renewing our idea or our notion of freedom. So it's not kind of a freedom from, but it's also not a freedom for, rather freedom with. And I was asking myself then, how does it look like? How is kind of this renewed understanding of freedom actually kind of performed or practiced in everyday life?
It's a completely legitimate question. Again, it's very. I'm not going to answer this all. That's why you said no before. Now again, it's because I wanted to ask the question. Okay. Well, again, I think when you imagine freedom as an ethical interdependence, ethical relationship, ethical practicing of your life and relationships with other life forms, other beings, known humans, and conditions, your existence. And of course, that's very abstract, but again, in certain aspects, we have to start abstracting. Of course, to think about freedom is not that then you read out of Michael or from America or whatever, then now freedom is this, freedom is not a thing, freedom is an experience, because it's hard to make it resonate on a level of affect, and of course, it takes time. It takes a long time. But no matter if you have to relearn it or de-learn it or learn it anew and so on and so forth. But we don't possible. If, for example, go to permaculture farms and stuff like that, you actually have people. Laura Settinelli, the Italian French anthropologist, written enormously interestingly about how these people who's working with the soil in an ecologically sustainable way, they actually see it as a mode of freedom. They experience it as freedom, being in a relationship to the soil, the land, and so on and so forth, as a self-realization process. And very rarely, if you read it through the interviews, close to how people imagine freedom existing at. So again, it's something that we're all experiencing with our new ways right now, because it's completely, that's another thing I wanted to say, now I jump in between, it's something I wanted to say before, it's not completely true, I think, that we only have to unlearn certain facility-based practices. We also do have to do that, that's for sure, but we also do need to relearn new practices simply because we do not know what an Earth system can do. We are at a very interesting moment, in my opinion, where we are rediscovering Earth again. We simply do not know, to paraphrase Spinoza, what the Earth system can do. That will, of course, take unlearning certain things, that will take relearning certain new things. And if I'm interested in that, it's because there is a little bit of a sense of discovery in the idea of a new planet that we are re-meeting in intensity like extensity as in the old horrible colonial history, of course. That would be my best answer. I mean, Dagmar Reemtsma, she speaks about the relationship to her dog. She speaks about it as pure species, as a mode of freedom. When you read, I wouldn't say Anthropocene, but you maybe read Leipzig Leadership and his tracking theory around wolves in the mountains, it all goes need more descriptions. Bruno was earlier describing territories. I'm very interested in describing the emotional landscapes, and again, the horizons, ethical landscapes for questions like that. But we don't have to answer that one book and say, I can't go out and say, now, take the train instead of the flight, and then you feel free. No, it takes time.
And first read this book.
But of course, you can read it all in the book.
Now that I have time to think, right now maybe it's just today, or maybe even just this minute. But I think if I would very much boil it down, that very big thing that can be everything and nothing, and that is overused in politics and underused in emotional discussions of all these things, and that has been politicized and, manipulated into becoming something I don't think it is. For me right now, if I kind of really take it personally, it has, for me, eventually to do just with belonging. How do I differentiate between flying and falling? And I think it's that flying means I belong to the air, and falling means I can't feel safe. And so, freedom doesn't mean for me endless choices and everything and nothing, and it also doesn't mean destroying what's around me and having a nice concept to attend that makes me feel good about it. But for me, it really has to do with knowing that whatever happens, I belong somewhere. And to watch that changes all the time and that develops, and that I think is a great thing in itself. And that is why I find it so irritating when people consider freedom to be the independence of independence itself as a great concept. what does it take for me to turn dependence into belonging? Not feeling like I'm being suffocated, but feeling like I coexist. In mutual respect and dignity.
Maybe the arts might be a better way to relate to the new emergence of the world's generation we were long before. And to me, freedom means to take the freedom if you lost, to dare to be lost. Always starting point. There are no answers. It's okay to feel lost. I keep telling my students it's okay after that you feel still confused, but feel hopefully confused on a higher level. Confusion is a good thing. Failure is the path, is the teacher of the journey on this inner work. I think you start to work on this little panel to express your particular new perspectives of those psychological grounds. Idea to have two last questions. And then it's 7:30. I take the questions. On the left hand side, I saw this man in the fifth show, this man over there in the right. What went wrong with this? This was only there. This is 5 floors. One word first and then one.
Thank you that I can ask the question. Coming back from our discussion about the inner feeling and the notions of freedom, of individual freedom, I'd like to turn our view to a more collective perspective again. We are here at an economic university, so despite changing our notions of individual freedom, we still have to think about that we live in a highly specialized industrial society with an economy, with technology. What is the notion, maybe, of you? Maybe it's not the subject, not the emphasis today, but maybe you have a notion how the economy, technology might change. Maybe we need different incentives for technology, different targets for the economy, to give us more hope, to give us a more hopeful perspective in a society that stays industrialized. However, we change our inner notion because we are 80 million people in Germany and we cannot just go and withdraw and live in a pure nature or in more purified nature. We have to feed 80 million people and more people around the world.
This question goes to
Yeah, well, the problem right now is we don't just feed 80 million people, but we call exploration for many more million people right around the world and justify our way of living with that. It's not that it's just we in Germany, we have an industry, but our industry runs on exploiting other places. That is the reality, that is the climate crisis. Germany is among the 10 countries in the world that has contributed most to the climate emergency. So all of that we're living in, and there's absolute legitimacy to raise the question of how do we maintain jobs and lives and so on for people. I just think it's crucial to emphasize that we didn't just build up this economy, and it's not just that this industry was made with all of our bare hands because we're dedicated workers, but because we externalize the cost to an extent that we can't even count. We have created a life by ending lives in other places, or at least ending livelihoods. That is the reality of the Wirtschaftswunder in Germany. It's that And we suddenly we find working environments changing because people are changing, and that is part of this great story that people have started asking themselves, where do I spend 8 hours, 5 days a week with my energy, my creativity, and my existence? I do not want to spend that in an environment where I produce problems. I want to produce answers. So that is, I think there is good news to it. And then, of course, there is parts of industries, not just in Germany, but around the world, that is right now lobbying the hell out of Brussels and Berlin and Washington. I mean, they don't really have lobbying there anymore. To lower environmental standards, to end carbon taxations, to water down regulation that we have established. And I think that is where we come back to the notion that Nikolaj made about, friends and enemies. I think there is real reason to support those who are driving the transformation. We have so much of the answers of that, and we have so much of the innovation we need, and great people, and we could have enough money to finance that if we change the level of finance politics in Germany. That is working out, but I think I'm less worried about that side that needs political support. I'm more worried that we underestimate how many industries and companies there still are who are going to fight for their lives for us not to stop a climate emergency and to treat everyone equally, greenwash us once, but also lower the chance for the others to thrive. For one, we need a supportive political environment and we need good people to go there, and for others, we need regulation and politics that doesn't water down another NBC cause. Because that is a story of 20 years of a transformation is too slow and too expensive right now. It's all the time that we had a crunch time moment like we have it now. Politics will kind of bend down and say, okay, never mind, it's a little too exhausting right now. And the first one, probably mixed opinions in the room, but one of the first ones who really said, we're going to go through that crunch time, we're going to dare to do this, was Robert Habeck. And he got so annoyed that he was like, guys, you just without me. And, now where are we? So I think it's, I think maybe it's not the answer we want, but it's the answer I have. It's being careful of who is working on what end of the transformation, who's working for the transformation, who's working against the transformation, and then making sure we find a mode in politics that makes it as hard as possible for fossil fuel lobbies and so on and so forth to corrupt what we thought was so intensive.